Hi guys, welcome to Multiverse. Some of you guys have been asking for quantum loadouts. So I'm going to start today with a loadout with a controller. Actually, I'll probably show two loadouts. And I'll make another video for the loadouts or DPS. So let's get started. Very quickly, I'll shoot a loadout very quickly, then I'll explain a bit the controller role, and then I'll dive deeper into the loadout. So right now the loadout I'm using, the loadout I've set up is Temporal Extortion, Time Shift, Event Horizon, Anomaly, Quantum Tunneling, and Warp Barrage. It's not really the loadout I usually use, but as a rule of thumb, I'm pretty sure this is the loadout that most people would prefer, so I went with that. A little quick crash course about controller. Basically, your main role as a controller is to give out powers. To give out power to the rest of the group. An easy way to do that, any power you use will actually act as what is known as the power of a time. If you look underneath the multiverse name, you'll see that little green lightning bolt. That is the power over time that's going on. Basically what the power over time is doing is giving power to everyone in the group over time. Every 5 seconds, roughly, you get a tick of power to everyone in the group for about 20 seconds. 25 seconds, I forget. So ideally, whenever you cast a power as a controller, any power, it will give you the little green lightning bolt. I will try to burn a little power so that you can see it. So you see those blue numbers that appear above my character? That's the power over time that's going on. So basically every 5 seconds I get what is known as a tick of power. And that's the blue number that you see appear. When you see the orange thingy, it's because I've done a critical power. I know that the role is called controller. Ironically enough, the tank will do a lot of the crowd control. Usually as a controller, you're going to want to give power to the group, and you're going to want to debuff enemies. And ideally, you're going to want to crowd control enemies that the tank is not crowd controlling. Like if the tank is crowd controlling a bunch of enemies, if you cast crowd controls in that, you may mess up what the tank is doing. So if the tank is crowd controlling a bunch of enemies, and you really want to do crowd control, then crowd control other enemies that the tank is not crowd controlling. But ideally, the lion's share of your work should be to give power to the group and to put debuffs on enemies and mostly on bosses. I will go through the loadouts, so it will make a bit more sense. So as I mentioned, basically the lion's share of what the controller is to give power to the group. So you want to have the group power heal in your loadout if you play as a controller. Every controller power has a group power heal, and every controller gives power over time. That's standard with the role. And all the controller roles have at least two of each debuffs. There's 3 debuffs total. Debuffs is maluses that you apply to enemies. So in this case, the time shift, if you see it underneath control role, it says that it reduces enemy defense. If you look under anomaly, it says controller role reduces the target's ability to heal. And Warp Barrage, if you look again under control role, reduces the target's damage output. So there's 3 debuffs. One that reduces damage, one that reduces the ability to heal, and one that reduces enemy defenses. And there's two debuffs that reduces enemy defense, there's 2 debuffs that reduces the ability to heal, and there's 2 debuffs that reduces the damage output. We'll take a look at that afterwards. And also, one of the reasons why I like to use Anomaly as the debuff, I use it not just because it's the debuff that reduces the ability to heal, but also it's the supercharge generator. Basically, whenever you use Anomaly, you recharge your supercharge a little bit more. And speaking of supercharge, the supercharge I like to use is Event Horizon. It's a shield, it's a group power heal, and also you can use it even if you're controlled. Like if you are controlled by enemies or something, you can still use this ability. And basically what it does is that it will cast a shield over yourself and everyone in the group, and it will restore power over time. That's why it's a group power heal. And also it's a shield because it shields the whole group. I will show you in a bit what it does. So I've switched to my combat layer, to my training layer, so that we can see what the abilities do. So let's get started. So the very first one is your group power heal. Basically what it does is that it gives power back to the 3 most fatigued players in the group. So basically the 3 players who have the less power in the group, they will get some power back from you doing this ability. Also, there is a white mod that will increase that. Like basically, you see escalate replenishing proc 5. What it does is that it increases the critical power chances by 5% for 6 seconds whenever I use a group power heal. So whenever I do this, I increase my chances to do a critical by 5%, like this. Obviously, all of that is random. It's always hard to tell if did I do a critical because I did increase the chances to do a critical, or was I going to make a critical anyway? There's no way to know that. And next, we're going to use our little ability here. As you can see, if you look underneath the sparring target, you see a little red shield. That's what this ability does. It does also damage and a bunch of other stuff, but mainly what we're looking at here is the debuffs. So what it does is that it debuffs the defense of the enemy. It lowers the defense of the enemy. So you can see the little sparring target as a little red shield underneath its name. That's because we're lowering its defense. The next one, this is our supercharge generator. Basically, whenever we use that ability, it recharges our supercharge a little bit. And also, as you can see, if you look underneath the sparring target, you can see a little red heart. That means that we've reduced the ability to heal on the sparring target. And last but not least, there's the attack debuff. Basically, it lowers the damage of the enemy. So you can see again underneath the sparring target, you see that little red target. That means that the enemy's damage should be lowered. And of course, you can have all 3 debuffs on a single enemy, no problem. Usually debuffs are worth to use on bosses. On mobs, it's not really worth it. You may want to cast them anyways. I will show you why in just a second. But as a rule of thumb, debuffs are mostly useful against bosses. Normally, if you have a good group of players, mobs will die in like 1 second. So casting debuffs on those mobs usually is not really worth it. There might be reasons why you want to do it anyway. But as a rule of thumb, casting debuffs on mobs is not that useful. Usually you want to cast debuffs on bosses. So as you see, when I used my supercharge generator, it increased my supercharge a little bit. So normally it should do that whenever I use my supercharge generator. So that's why I use that ability mostly. The healing debuff, it is useful, but not that much. There isn't that many enemies that actually heal themselves in this universe online. So the healing debuff itself is not that useful. So that's why I go with that ability, because it does a lot more than just cast the healing debuff. So you see, if you look at my ability tray, you can see that my supercharge is full and that I can use it. Although if you look underneath the multiverse, underneath my name, you can see that my supercharge is only about halfway full. The reason for that is quite simple. The event horizon only requires a 50% of your supercharge to be activated. So basically, if my supercharge is full, I can use the event horizon twice. I'm going to cast it just one time so that you guys can see what it does. So let's get started. So basically what it does is that it casts a shield over you and over everyone in your group. There is a range, so if some players are too far away from you, they're not going to be able to be affected by that. So basically it's a shield that protects your group, and also it gives power over time to your group. So if my blue bar had been empty, the supercharge would have filled it at least a little bit. But of course there is also another shield that I have. Is the quantum tunneling. The quantum tunneling does 2 things. It allows you to cast a shield, but also it teleports you. It teleports you in a short distance, but sometimes it's enough to be able to get away from enemies or get out of trouble. So if you see that the big attack will fall on your character, we have to wait a bit. So if you see that the big attack will fall on your character, you can use the quantum tunneling to get out of the way very quickly. So it's pretty much multi-useful. It serves to shield your character, but also it serves to be able to get you out of harm's way if you need to, or you can use it offensively if you want to get towards it, to move closer towards an evil enemy that's trying to escape from you. You can use the quantum tunneling to do that. So it's a pretty versatile ability. So we'll try to explain a bit more what each ability does now that you actually saw what those abilities do. So again, the temporal extortion is a group power heal. So you give power back to the 3 players who need it the most. It's pretty much that simple. There's also a little weapon buff. I may as well show it. There's also a weapon buff. Basically, if you see underneath my character's name, you can see a little green target. Basically, weapon attacks will do extra damage thanks to the buff. So again, it's a group power heal, giving power to your friends, and it's a group weapon buff, making the weapons do a bit more damage. For the time shift, again, it reduces enemy defense. It does a whole bunch of other things, but in the controller role, what you're more concerned about is the reduced enemy defense part. So I've showed you what the event horizon does. So you saw it is a shield that protects not just your character, but everyone in the group. And it's a group power heal that will give power back to the group. And anomaly, as you saw, it reduces the target's ability to heal. And acts also a bit as a crowd control and a few other things. And it is the supercharge generator. It will help you recharge your supercharge faster so that you can cast your supercharge more often. And again, in this universe online, there isn't that many enemies that actually heal. So the ability to heal is limited in its use. But again, just for the supercharge generator, it's always good to use anomaly. And it can even work as a bit of crowd control device. You saw quantum tunneling, so basically it's a shield, but also it allows you to move out of harm's way or to move towards enemy if you need to. And the warp barrage, basically it reduces the target's damage output, so enemies will do less damage when you apply that debuff on them. There's a few artifacts that will work with your controller powers. In this case here, you can see that if I hit an enemies with the controller debuff, it grants to me and up to 7 group members power equals to, right now I'm up to 8% of my vitalization. And it also increases your precision by 1.3%. So that's another reason why to cast debuffs. There might be situations where debuffs aren't really needed, but thanks to that little artifact, it's worth to cast anyway, just to be able to get the extra power and the extra precision. There's also the Amulet of Ra, which basically increases the efficiency of your debuffs. Right now the debuffs are 20% stronger, and they add up to 1 additional target. Normally when you cast a debuff, only the enemy that you are targeting will be affected by the debuff. So even if you have a power that affects a whole bunch of enemies, only the one that you're targeting will be debuffed. But here we have this little artifact who changes that. Like right now, it can debuff 1 additional target, and eventually I will be able to debuff 2 additional target, and eventually I will be able to debuff 4 additional target. So eventually, as I level up this artifact, I should be able to debuff multiple targets at once. And there's also the Entwined Rings of Azar. This one, whenever I use a group power heal, it gives the group, to basically everyone in the group, health equal to, in this case, 12% of my vitalization. You can see it can go up to 18% as I level up the artifact. This is, I think, the very first artifact I got. But then later on, once we got the Parasite Power of Harness, it was obvious that that's the one I would level up instead. And now we got also the Amulet of Ra. So I will most likely level up the Amulet of Ra and the Parasite Power of Harness. And then later on, maybe I will keep on updating, increasing the Ring of Azar. I'm still thinking about that. I'm tempted to replace the Ring of Azar with something else. When I do, I'll probably make a video about that. Ironically enough, the loadout I showed you is not really the loadout I'm using. I'll show you the loadout I'm using. It's still the similar loadout in the sense that I still use the group power heal, I still use a defense debuff, I still use my supercharge, I still use anomaly for the supercharge generator, I still use quantum tunneling, but also instead I still use the damage debuff. But instead I'm using Albuquerque wave, and I'm using Singularity. I will show you why in just a second. So basically I use Singularity because I love this power. I love what it does. And as you can see, it can affect multiple targets. Normally, only one target would have the debuff, But thanks to my artifact, you can see that both sparring targets are actually affected by the debuff. So that is one of the reasons why I prefer to use Singularity. But also, I love this ability. I love how if I cast it, let's say on this little target over here, it will even pull the other targets towards it. Oh, it didn't work this time. Let's try again. So I love how sometimes it can pull multiple targets together. And Albuquerque Wave does something a bit similar in the sense that it will affect multiple targets. Let me show you how. So basically it casts a huge wave of energy that pretty much gather everything on its path. And it can even grab, there's none, oh let's try and see if I can maybe cast it this way. It can even grab enemies behind you and send them in front of you. It's a little bit tricky though to use in certain situations, which is why I didn't show it in my original loadout. Basically, if you're in a situation where you have to be careful or you have to target only a single enemy, then this wave can be problematic in certain missions or in certain situations. The same with Singularity. Sometimes you don't want to affect a whole bunch of enemies, you just want to affect them one at a time for reasons. So Singularity could be a problem in those situations. But luckily I've been playing as a controller long enough that I pretty much know when not to cast those abilities, if it makes sense. So this is pretty much the loadout that I enjoy using. But for most controllers, using the previous loadout that I showed might be the better option. And one of the reasons also why I love to use Singularity is when I play as a DPS. I will make a DPS video, but just to give you guys an idea. I love to use a Singularity in combination with a Gravity Well. Basically you cast a Gravity Well, and then you cast Singularity, and the Singularity will pull every enemies into the Gravity Well. So that is pretty much it for our controller quantum loadout. I'm sure some of you guys may disagree with some of my choices, but roughly that's pretty much what I use as a controller. And that's pretty much what I suggest for people to use. So get a group power heal, get the various debuffs, and if you can get a shield, and even better a group shield, I would strongly suggest you do that. So that's pretty much it for now, guys. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask so in the comment section down below, and I'll see what I can do about answering your questions. So as always, guys, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.